Welcome back to the Wolf Den podcast, joined again by your hosts, Naco and Zenitsu. This week, we actually have a fairly interesting topic. Um, we have the results of the Texas Digifest, and this will really allow us to further dive into the BT7 meta discussion and the impact of the side decks and mulligans to the Digimon TCG. Um, so I guess looking at the initial data, what are your thoughts, Zenitsu?
Well, just taking a step back and looking at not only just what happened with the Digifest Arlington, but going back and looking at GG Tour and the PPG because they were still sizable events, we could see that there is a little bit of a dominance in blue hybrids and all of its offshoots and spin-offs.
Yes. Um, as anyone who's aware, or if they're not aware, the top eight of the PPG Digifest um, was six blue hybrids, one black X antibody slash Subagon punch, and one yellow purple hybrid. Um, Now, I feel like people would be correct to potentially assume that we are going down a road similar to that of Gabubond from BT6. Um, but I feel like this meta isn't as solved, and even though these initial results are showing positive, very strong results for blue hybrids, it definitely won't reach the success long term that Gabubond had. Um, so like having I guess you've way more experience than I do playing blue hybrid specifically. What do you think like specifically are the strengths of the deck?
So initially when I was first playing around with the deck, I was just going full up Strabbies, and then I realized that the deck was just actually too slow. Just because evolving on not your tamers is just not super good. So once I took a look at the data and started playing with more floodgates in the form of Madoki Betamon and Syakomon, I noticed that like, oh, I literally can just sit and chill on these cards, try to stop the opponent, and try to gain value off of the opponent playing less efficiently because I have two floodgates sitting on the field, stopping them from playing almost anything that would gain them initial value. And then that's kind of how I play this game, where it's just like I wait for them to mess up, and then I try to capitalize and punish on their mess up by stun locking their Digimon, keeping them stun locked, and then I start switching gears to being more aggressive.
So, um, just because I feel like there is a difference here, what is your um, are you running like the full Magna package, or what are you running for the actual like Koji Magna?
So I'm only running two Kojis, and I believe I'm running two Magnas. Just because like they're more game finishers rather than like something I'm actually going to be using throughout the majority of the match. It's just like if it just so happens that I'm sitting on a whole bunch of memory, I could go Magna, get an extra card in my hands to Digivolve on top of a Tamer while removing a body off of their field while being able to multi-attack. Like the card does a lot, but it does a lot in the late game. So in the early stages of the game, the card's kind of bad and you're almost never going to try using it. And like anytime I saw him in my opener, I was just like, wow, this card's just a dead card. So I'm only running two Magnas for that reason, and I'm running two Kojis just because Koji is actually a solid card because of all of the draw that blue has as a whole, but he's not super great. Just because the opponent could be playing their own floodgates to stop his ability. There's no blockers, so it's not like he's not gonna like the Digimon's not gonna get through. We're just using him as basically just an extra fodder to Digivolve on top of Tamer wise.
Okay. So yeah, two and two seems like the most people usually run. Like at least anyone that's running more than that is outside of the like standard ratios, as I'd kind of call them. Um, and I think it's just a really interesting thing that um, we've already seen these the blue hybrid players move away from this Koji package and just more into like the Hexablau, style of deck, or at least like what Hexabell wanted to do, where they're just source removal control, and then like this champion rush coming at people with like level 4 blue hybrids.
Yeah, because like the big problem with Koji as a whole is he's just significantly worse than Takuya. Like just sacrificing a lot of hand advantage just to make a Magna play is kind of not worth it unless you're winning that turn. So a lot of people are going more Hexablau Azulong route, just because you could easily stun lock the opponent's Digimon. You're already attacking their inheritables, and especially in the case with the Zulong, like it could help you catch up in matchups where you're falling behind in terms of the security race because you could stun lock their Digimon, keep them on the field, then make a very powerful Azulong turn to swing the tides of the game in your favor.
Yeah, and I know like a lot of these lists aren't even necessarily running specifically Hexablau or Azulong. They're just kind of using like blue source removal, mostly basically just in the form of Tommy and Sora and Joe and Howling Mem boost, and basically just relying on their hybrids, their level 4s, and um, Beowulfmon to win the game.
Yeah, and it's more specifically the BT7 Beowulf Mon. The BT4 one sees very, very, very light play just because you can't attack into it, but like there's so much removal on level 5s and below that like I don't necessarily think it's that great. So at least with the BT 7 one, he could evo for 1, making it easy to go up a chain, on top of the fact that he's adding a level 4 back to your hand to then reuse for even more aggression and more value later. So like that's what's making the new Beowulf really, really good.
So I don't want to get into the two like of the broad specifics of like why blue hybrid's good. Um, I know we talked a little bit about that last episode, um, but really, looking at the bigger picture here, so we're seeing a lot of early results from blue, more so now from this DigiFest, even with the inclusion of a sideboard, mulligans. Um, do you think blue has a strong sideboard mulligan presence in the meta?
I actually think it does. Sideboard's a little bit less so. So I'm currently running a Susano list one, and I only side in Susanomon mostly against yellow just because of how grindy that matchup is. So like that's the biggest tech that's coming out of my sideboard is Susanomon because the deck really doesn't need it, and like it could be helpful, but sometimes they just play around your Sora and Joe's where like you don't get as much value as you want. Sometimes they could have a floodgate on the field to stop your memory gain, so you can't necessarily easy go to 7. But against yellow, it's like really the only card I'm actually teching in for, just because I need to deal that extra damage.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. That like Susano just feels too slow in blue hybrids against other blue hybrids, pretty much. Not exclusively, but like yellow is really the matchup where you want to see Susano.
Yeah, and like right now I'm testing out Neemon just because I still am playing Koji, just because, well, I have more tamers with inheritables to actually make Neemon better. And so far, Neemon kind of just helps with the overall aggression of the deck, and I'm really liking him.
I feel like you're the only one. I'm sorry, but like I just don't see anyone else doing anything with Neemon, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, like, the big drawback is he is another white Digimon in the deck, and he is kind of slowing the deck down as a result, giving you, like, less cards that you can do multiple things with. But I don't know. I'm a huge Neemon fan. I think he was funny in the show, and I really like his ability in this aggro style of deck. But that's because I'm more of an aggro player.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having like pet Digimon that you want to make work, even if it like probably makes the deck less competitive. Are you swapping Bokos for the Neemon, or are you just adding it in addition?
I'm just adding in an addition. So like like this is going back to the sideboard. I'm only going to be running two of each of the floodgates, and then because normally you'd run three and three of each, um Siaku and Madoki, but I am teching in the Neemon and then siding it out when I don't need it.
That's fair. I mean, that seems like not too aggressive of a ratio. It just gives you like two fewer sources to draw from in raising. But I mean, how often I guess are you doing that anyway?
Yeah, I'm only running 4 eggs right now, and that's kind of like the reason why. If I was running more Madokis and more Siakos, I'd probably want the fifth egg.
Hmm.
But like blue also draws a lot, so sometimes that could be a detriment. And you just hold your last Digimon in raising and move it out when needed.
Which egg are you running? Because there's actually some contention, it looks like, among the top lists.
I am running Kiaromon just
Okay.
because I really, really value the fact that I don't need to attack with Madoki or Syakomon.
Hmm.
And like that's a big factor on like making my cards more efficient. It's just like, yeah, sometimes uh drawing off of Upamon is really good just because it's a little bit more consistent to do, but at the risk of your floodgates getting deleted by them hitting something in security or them being vulnerable because now they're suspended.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just like you're you're going to want to evo off of either your Madoki or your Siaku, and those aren't the Digimon you want to be attacking with to gain advantage. Like they already are advantage by like just being there and like asking for removal. Um, so adding that requirement that you need to attack from Upa is kind of detrimental and somewhat counterintuitive to your game plan.
Right, and that's like the only reason why I'm running Kiaro is because it just is easier to sit on the cards and do nothing with until the later end of the game.
So I have my opinions, but um, I guess I want to hear your opinion first. Like, given these early results, do you think Blue's too strong?
Um, Blue is very strong, but I think like this is where we need to start forming a rock paper scissors approach because blue still does struggle with yellow. And it could still get blown out by Cherubi. Like these matchups aren't necessarily like 100% in blue's favor. Like from my experience playing a whole bunch of games with a whole bunch of like my friends who are somewhat top players, um like these matchups are not blowouts. Like they are very, very close, like down to the wire. Very rarely, unless one of us like ends up not drawing anything, then it becomes a blowout. But like until then, it's a huge nail biter on who's gonna win because one small mistake and there goes the whole game.
I mean, isn't that always kind of had been how aggro decks win? Like going all the way back to like Rookie Rush, like you usually kind of do like very specific math as far as like how many attacks you have and how many security they could have and how many you expect to die.
I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like that's still all here in blue hybrids, but it's a little bit more intricate because you have to pick and choose like what you're trying to value and what you're trying to do to not only stop the opponent but to aggress yourself. Like that's why Kori Kakuman is such a good card, is because he stops the opponent's offense and defense while you're also chipping at the opponent. Like the card's insane.
Hmm. As long as you give them a target to stun lock, but I guess if you don't, you're winning anyway.
Right. It's like a doomed if you do, doomed if you don't kind of a scenario. And a lot of these top decks, not only just blue hybrid specifically, just feel that way where it's just like, oh, I could get punished and blown out very easily with one small mistake.
And
Except for yellow. Like yellow, there is no real small mistakes. It's just you swing and you hope for the best.
I was gonna say, because I know a lot of the discussion going into BT7 was around yellow and yellow hybrids more specifically. Like, where is yellow?
Yellow is losing because it takes too long. So, like, most of the time, you're going to end up in a best of one. Your first game is going to take 30, 40 minutes. And, like, if you don't win that one match, then you just basically lost the entire run. Um, and even if you don't win and you don't lose, a tie is almost technically a loss because it's less points on your record. So, like, you're still behind the top tables, even though you haven't technically lost. So, you're still not putting yourself in a better position by doing that. And unfortunately, Yellow just doesn't have a good way of closing out the game.
Yeah, their best bet is basically just waiting to like start the turn with 7 memory and then play like evoing into Susanomon without passing the turn.
Yeah, or like chipping with Seraphimon when they feel safe to.
Yeah.
Um, but like it's a very slow deck just because of how the tamers work. So it's like your tamers don't want you to attack until the very end.
Hmm. So, um, I I guess I don't ask any question that like I don't necessarily know the answer to as far as like the meta, and the easiest time to uh, like I guess show people why is so besides the PPG, the Digifest results are just kind of posted. I think they were on Facebook more specifically. They're nice graphics that were made. Um,
I found them on Twitter, but
okay,
that's neither here nor there.
Twitter works. Um, I got them from your Discord, so anyone that isn't in Zenitsu's Discord, make sure to join. It's a great resource for people to just talk about deck discussion and um, like ways to improve their decks or improve their play. So I definitely recommend that. But
Yeah, I got a couple of good friends who are in it and we play sometimes.
uh, I've been pulling like at least aggregated data from Limitless because there've been a number of tournaments now run through Limitless, and they kind of aggregate their data like between tournaments. So we can really look at the bigger picture there, and um, I guess this is where we start to getting into like the like is blue hybrids just new Gabumon? Is it just the new like best deck potentially tier 0? Um and but I think the data is kind of telling here. So I guess before we talk about blue, I'll finish since you started with yellow already. Um Now Limitless unfortunately like defines decks by like archetypes, and it doesn't necessarily do a great job of labeling those archetypes because it traditionally tries to label decks by its boss monster. So like um it calls yellow purple hybrid a type of deck, but it calls yellow shine greymon, which is just yellow purple um hybrids but with the inclusion of shine greymon, a different deck, or yellow hybrids, which is just yellow hybrids without the purple package entirely, all separate decks, and it really kind of messes with the data. But even if you combine them and you like clean it up, you see basically exactly what Zinni's was talking about is yellow doesn't necessarily lose to other decks that much. It still wins quite a bit, and it is by Limitless's data the most popular deck in the BT7 format. Um, when you add all these different versions together, um, most more people have brought this deck than any other deck represented in these tournaments. But um, it loses to itself, meaning like it ties way more commonly than any other deck either. We're looking at out of like 50 or 60 matches, like 12 ties. That's crazy.
Yeah, like if you see the mirror in a large event that matters a lot, like you already know that this is not going to be good. And like the problem is like there's no good way for the deck to actually play out of its mirror other than like just trying to see who Susano's first to try to deal more damage faster. And even then like Yellow Hybrid still has an out to Susano, so it's just like it just becomes super awkward of a game just because the deck is very, very passive with no actual clear like way to win.
Yeah, especially and like I just mentioned, it is the most popular deck. So you have a deck that is the most frequently played deck numerically that also is loses ties out at least in the mirror match, which the most common enemy you're going to play against is yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like why we're seeing the success on a lot of other decks is because like they're either A, farming yellow, which is basically what all red decks do. They just farm yellow and they're just like, "Oh, yellow hybrids? All right, my ancient Greymon's going to swing for 7 or 8 security checks minimum. There goes your whole security blitz for game." Like it's not necessarily a free win, but it's a very easy win. And then like if you're just a good player on like Purple Cherubimon, Lilith Loop, or even Blue Hybrids, you could still just win just by swinging in almost blindlessly, as long as you have a good enough plan on why you're swinging.
Yeah, I definitely want to say like blue is favored into yellow hybrid at all variants probably. Um, Only because while Schwartz Lizards does kind of shit on their champion rush plan, like I think the best part about blue hybrid is somewhat like of a rookie rush mentality where they don't necessarily care about their specific pieces. They have so many different ways to finish games and end games, and they still have that, back pocket. They are a hybrid deck. Their security is one of the more dangerous ones. Like as opposed to like you're not gonna lose to a yellow hybrid security. You're probably either gonna give them a tamer, or they're gonna recover one, or I guess you hit Wyvern's Breath and something will die. But um, blue hybrids at least like you kind of forward their game plan, or you just hit a Hammer Spark or an Ice Wall and you end your own turn.
Yeah, even like at worst, it's like Tommy into Sora and Joe. Now you're giving them more memory than you would have hoped to plan. And sometimes you just can't plan around giving them a lot of memory. And like giving Blue a lot of memory is almost a death sentence, especially in a hybrid deck where you could taper your attacks. And that's kind of just how you win, is like you just taper enough to make it so that the security doesn't really mean much of anything, and then you just keep going in. You just keep hammering.
Yeah, that is definitely something to note. Like their biggest counter to your strategy would be Schwartz Lizard in security, but you don't have to turn your tamers into Digimon until they need to swing.
Right. And like I think the big thing that's also making yellow a lot worse is just the additional ways other decks can gain value off of their cards. So like red hybrids is a perfect example. It's like, oh, now their trash is fodder for Takuya to be able to make even more powerful plays than they already were. Blue has Beowulfmon to bounce some of the level fours back to your hand, so now you're actually increasing the amount of level fours that you're using. Purple Cherubi, your Cherubi dies, now you have a field full of rookies that are also going to be swinging. Like, there's just a lot of different ways to gain additional value that yellow hybrids just can't keep up with at times.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty uh, worthwhile to note that a lot of the decks, like so basically what we're seeing here, like isn't necessarily the result of a meta where people are trying to beat blue hybrid. I think we're seeing the results of what happens if every deck's trying to beat yellow hybrid.
Right, and blue is just coming out on top because it actually has some really good matchups against some of the other decks. So, like, one of its best matchups is actually against red hybrids, just because red hybrids move slower than blue. It's like, okay, yeah, you punch their security, but like I said again, their security sometimes is more dangerous than yours, where it's just like they're playing ancient, swing for like 7 checks, and then they hit a Tommy, and now the amount of checks is like reduced.
Hmm.
So, like, they're still just very good into that matchup, and like it's kind of that way across the field where it's just like, yeah, blue hybrids is just good against some of the decks that are trying to counter yellow.
And I think blue farms red hybrids because blue's just significantly more consistent. Like, um, something that
Oh,
I
way more consistent.
something I know Zenitsu wanted to mention, or at least he's mentioned to me in our conversations privately, is that like red hybrids, their tamers just kind of suck. Like, so if we're just taking turns going back and forth, I'm blue, I play my Tommy, and then on their turn they play their David or not Davis, Jesus, the Greymon guy. Um,
Takuya.
Not Takuya, the other one. They're all the
Tai.
Greymon guy. No, the
Yeah.
other one.
Oh, Marcus.
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 Oh, see, they're all the Greymon one. Um, yeah, they play Marcus. Like, that just like the value exchange there is so drastic. Tommy is really just a good card. It's my favorite card in BT7. I don't even play blue hybrids. I actually don't even like blue hybrids, but like Tommy is just a really good card.
Yeah, and like part of the also like harping on the whole like red tamers kind of suck. They really do. Like you play their hybrids and almost none of them gain you any initial value at all. So it's all like post value, and like that post value doesn't necessarily always come, and blue has that advantage where it's just like, okay, I play this, I gain a benefit, even though it's not going to do anything later half the time. You still got something versus red where you're waiting to get something.
Yeah. So, um, going back to like what I was saying about like, I don't think blue hybrid is too strong. At least that's my opinion. Because I think what we're seeing here is everyone came into these tournaments, especially this bigger tournament, this Digifest, with side decks and mulligans and craziness, potentially getting adopted. We have no idea. Um, the idea that yellow is really the matchup that you're most likely to see, and the data still supports that. So everyone is teching for it. So like I guess we kind of know the answer somewhat of like in a world where everyone tries to beat yellow, there's a lot of blue. Blue just kind of beats yellow out. It's more consistent, it's faster, and it doesn't get punished in the same ways that other decks get punished by yellow's strategy.
Right, and with all the different variants on what blue can do, it really just makes blue very versatile and flexible. So if you're 100% afraid of the yellow matchup, a Zulongmon is like one of your best friends. It's like, yeah, let me just evo for like 2, 3, sometimes even 0, depending on the board state and the matchup. And then you just swing for like 3 to 5 checks at times. It could be really insane.
So, um, unlike Gabubond, where I feel like Gabubond was the deck everyone was trying to beat, and yet Gabubon was still the deck that was winning. I don't think we're at a point yet. We'll have to wait until potentially after the next DigiFest in Miami, because I feel like people are shifting gears. It might not be super quick. We don't necessarily have that much time. BT8 is kind of already on the horizon, but um, I don't think we're in a world where people are genuinely trying to beat blue as much as they could be trying to beat blue.
Right. And I definitely like yellow is still just probably one of the better decks to beat, but like that's like the pocket deck to beat where it's just like it's almost a gatekeeper where it's like if you can't beat yellow hybrids, then you're in for a world of hurt, but you also need to be thinking about how to beat blue hybrids as well.
I think it's really funny that like based on my earliest like statements and opinions, yellow and blue have just swapped entirely. Blue is the new big bad, yellow is the new gatekeeper. Because I remember like playing against one of our teammates like way more Koji focused, like 4 Koji, 4 Magna, and it was so much slower and so much like I guess clunkier of a deck. I was farming that deck with green, with red a little bit, like um black X antibody if I saw any X antibody cards, of which there are few. Um, and now that blue players have kind of realized, okay, what's good, what's bad, what do we need, what do we not need, and they basically have decided that like Magna's not necessarily worth it. We still play Koji for his value and role in the deck, but that's about it. And now we just lean on Tommy, we lean on Korikakumon, and we stun lock and we win the game.
Right, and like as much as I hate to bring up Japanese data, like that's what the Japanese towards the end of their meta with all of like the craziness of the cards being unrestricted and our cards restricted, that's where they were headed, and that's what Blue Hybrid still was trying to do even in their BT8 and post metas. Like so us just adopting that from the get-go just made Blue have a very good showing out of the gate, especially when everyone was afraid of yellow. But like going back to the like blue and yellow keep swapping positions, it kind of always feels that way where it's just like sometimes it's either blue that's the top deck or yellow that's the top deck. You look at BT6, it was blue Gabubond. Look at BT5, it was Lord Nightmon. Look at BT4, it was Yellow
Yellow.
War Greymon. You look at BT3, it was Blue Imperial. Like, it's always been blue and yellow that's been topping the most and have
hmm
been, like, the most threatening.
Yeah, it's the two most competitively consistent colors by far. Um, and everything else has kind of been like somewhere in between. Jesmon's been meta relevant, but never like the top meta. Um, you had small showings from like black manages to eke its way in there sometimes, purple manages to eke its way in there sometimes. But if basically if you want it to be like the most consistently competitive player, you're flipping between blue or yellow depending on the meta.
Right. And we're not saying it's going to be that way always and forever going forward. That's just the trend that we've been noticing based on like just the whole experience that we've had with Digimon as a whole.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, it's definitely not a wrong observation, and even looking forward, um, it's still like a safe competitive colors to pick from. Um, but uh, I don't want to move too far away from the discussion at hand because I was about to mention it. Like, so if we are in a world where blue is now the new big bad, yellow is the gatekeeper, like, you kind of need to, like, litmus test, can I beat yellow? Can I still beat yellow if I happen to see it? Because it may not necessarily be the most numeric deck. Moving forward, we may see people pull back on it, especially fearing the mirror, especially, and fearing the falling asleep at the wheel while playing the deck. Um, but I definitely think that people are going to start picking up on the decks that do beat blue, one of them being Purple Cherubi.
Yeah, Purple Cherubi is not an easy match for blue by any stretch of the word, and Purple Cherubi also has a good matchup into yellow as well, just because, like, Purple Cherubi I would define as like a punishment deck, where it's like, okay, you do your thing, cool, I'm gonna punish you for whatever you just did. And that's kind of just the story of Purple Cherubimon, just because, again, it has an insane resource and value engine, being able to replay its tamers, it has retaliation on its hybrid, so that way you could swing willy nilly. You don't care because Purple Cherubi will bring back the Tamer, and then you just start popping Digimon off the field because Purple Cherubi just does that as well.
Yeah,
And then when Purple Cherubi dies, the pinata is broken, and then the flood of level threes that just do a whole bunch of crazy stuff just come out.
yeah, I think it's really like Cherubimon is such a good card for the blue matchup. Like you have the when digivolving of popping all of those floodgates and meant like because these decks, especially blue, are just full of level threes that like to sit on the board and mess with your game plan. Um, and those just go away. Um, I mean, not all of them, depending on how many there are, but like Cherubi removes them fairly efficiently. Pokemon especially. Like there should at least be a Pokemon on anyone's field, basically, regardless of the matchup at this point. Um, and then you can have a level six, which is immune to Schwartz Lizards, um, swinging security that you kind of almost hope dies, and if it doesn't, you usually have some way to kill it to get the value out of it anyway.
Right. And like just because it's also adopting the hybrid package, you have very easy ways to go up into Cherubimon just because you could be like, okay, two, then one, then Cherubi and pass, and then just ruin the entire opponent's day. And like especially against blue, where like sometimes you just play Tamer and pass sometimes, like purple also does that too, and they have also some really good Tamer value to be able to extend past that three memory threshold to be able to do lots of powerful things with.
Yep, we're definitely running the same wavelength tonight because that was exactly what I was going to say next. Like, because unlike red, uh, purple has really good tamers, tamers that not even necessarily have been used previously for their value. Especially in I had the I didn't get to watch. I mean, I guess it was in person. I don't know if there was anything recorded from the DigiFest, but I actually watched the last Gyroshan Gigi Tour finals match, with which Purple Hybrid won versus a Blue Hybrid, and there are a lot of like cool, like intricate plays that can be made. Like I guess like any deck that involves levels of recursion and like value engines of that variety, like there's some very difficult and very complicated plays that can be made where like um I know Gyroshan even noted in his commentary like um he just drew like you draw one discard and then he threw away a Cherubi. And he's like, why did he throw away a Cherubi? And then the next turn he played a mat pulling the Cherubi back, just gaining value, you know? He was going to play that mat
Right.
anyway. He might as well throw something that he can pull back.
Right, and the fact that the purple hybrids that you're using with Cherubi have really good on play abilities also helps the overall playability on like Cherubimon's overall game plan. And I think like that's where a lot of these hybrid decks are shifting towards is like, are your teamers good enough to not only just get past you that 3 memory threshold, but to do various other powerful things that are also adding to your overall consistency. So yellow hybrids, part of the reason why it's so good is because they can easily gain you like up to 7 memory for you literally doing absolutely nothing. And then stalling out, adding cards into your hand from your security, almost making your security a resource. Like, that's just the kind of trend that I'm noticing with all of these hybrid based decks. And the only reason why red is still around is because Takuya just lets you use the cards in your trash to gain additional value to do more powerful plays with.
Yeah. I mean, I'd go as far as to say Red Hybrid wouldn't exist if the specific interaction with Takuya and Ancient Greymon didn't exist.
Right, and I also think like red hybrids wouldn't be doing as well as it did if it wasn't farming the yellow hybrids because that matchup, it's because yellow moves so slow, it just gives red all of the time in the world to be able to like do anything it wants. Like I've had plays where I'm just like Evo for 5 into an ancient on top of an Aldemon, pass turn, and then they just can't respond to the ancient, and then I'm just like, cool, swing 5 checks into your security.
Hmm.
It's nuts, but that's like the fault of yellow hybrids on how slow it moves.
Yeah. And I guess not to like to say that yellows are without answer, because a lot of them, if you look at the um, sideboard data, they've been since they already run like a small purple package. Not all of them, but some of them. Like this is the sixth place. Sided has 3 fly bullets in their sideboard. Um, that's an answer. At least to that specific turn that you just mentioned. Um, but um, actually, that's the only yellow hybrid. I'm looking for the other one, and there isn't one because there's only one yellow hybrid that is in the top 8. But so that player, like I guess, at least understands the fault of their colors and understands the faults of their deck, and tried their best to side accordingly.
Yeah, because like part of the only real reason why they're even running Schwartz Lizard is because like outside of Shine Greymon, they just can't deal with wide fields. It's like cool. It's kind of like my initial fault on why I hate recovery as a whole, where it's less like you get to stall out the game, but you don't advance or progress anything. And
Hmm.
like the yellow hybrids, at least like if a tamer comes out, there's some progression there. But like at the end of the day, you're just sitting there doing nothing, just trying to keep your security full and hoping that you have enough memory to basically just try to push.
So, um, and I don't like to make statements that doesn't have some amount of like weight or validity to them, and the reason why I really like am championing yellow hybrid at least is that uh, or I'm sorry, purple hybrid, purple to ruby hybrid as the like potential answer to blue hybrid is that yellow actually has a very good win rate against blue hybrid as compared to like these other decks. Um, especially like into yellow. Purple kind of really farms yellow. Um, even going, it is the second highest win rate deck on Limitless that is like represented in the data that like outside of like very low sample sizes. Like um, there have only been 8 matches played by Three Musketeers out of these tournaments, and has won a decent amount of them. So the 2 players playing it have done well, but that's it. Um, so anything with any like a modicum of sample size, um, the second best performing is Purple Hybrid. Actually, the third being the other purple deck, Lilithloop, which is actually interesting. I didn't know that until I looked at it now, but yeah. So basically, the 2 purple decks are showing significantly fewer plays, but far more wins comparatively, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, like Lilithloop is still a really good deck just because like the new Cerberus combo and the Eismon package just add so much value to the deck that it just didn't have before to actually be able to close out games when you go into Lilithmon. Like the big problem before with Lilith Loop was like, okay, you do your whole combo, you waste a whole bunch of time, and then you just don't kill the opponent. Well, now you actually kind of have a way to attempt to try to kill the opponent more than what it was doing before, so it's a little bit more proactive on how it's trying to win.
Mm.
On top of
Um,
the setup being easier because of Eismon.
so there are actually a lot fewer um, Lilith Loop games registered here, and actually most of them have not done well. Most of these players have either gone like 2-2, 3-3, or worse. It was only one player won one of these events with Lilith Loop, um, and that's kind of really skewing the data a little bit. But I think that I represents Lilith Loop perfectly almost like is that like the players that do well with Lilith Loop put up numbers. The players that don't. Like it is still in my opinion like the highest skill ceiling deck, the deck that rewards people for playing it the longest and like at this point if you haven't been playing it since BT5, I probably don't recommend you pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, Lilith Loop also did really well in Arlington. It got what, fourth place?
Fourth
Yeah, fourth place.
place.
And like that just goes to show you that like even purple as a whole still has like a lot of tech and tools to counter lots of various different decks just because everything in purple just kind of works together.
I think Neo Devimon is a huge reason for Lilith Loop doing well in that tournament specifically. Um, and I think it's a good like point for purple moving forward if side decks are added like more broadly.
Yeah, like cards like that where it's just like ordinarily it just would not see play, just actually start getting to be possible options on good cards to start thinking about just because of how side decks function and like what their purpose is.
Yeah, like looking at these side decks in general, um, there's not a lot of things that are too crazy, especially like the blue hybrids. They're very like not they're not even very techy. They're just kind of consistency based. Like some of them are siding out their Susano, like Zenitsu had mentioned, or they're siding in a Zulong or Hexablau or an extra tamer or two. Um the first and second place players, I'm not sure if they're like friends with each other or they like playtest against each other or something, but like both of them had decided to tech in purple Mimi, the tamer that like allows you to gain a memory on either turn if someone plays an option card. I don't necessarily know what deck that's for. I guess maybe loop.
Yeah, I mean, like it could also like make some of your options a little bit better depending on what your amount is. So like it makes your howling only cost two. It gives you an extra memory off of your hammer sparks. So like it's not the worst card in the world. It just kind of seems a little bit awkward considering we're not super option heavy right now.
Especially as we just mentioned how like the deck's greatest strength is its like consistency and flexibility, and adding a purple tamer in a deck that can't utilize it otherwise seems fairly like wrong. I guess well it is also a two cost tamer, which is pretty relevant. It may be used in situations to choke.
Yeah, like choking in this format, like if they don't have a memory tamer and like you have a floodgate as a blue hybrid player, like the second you start choking them, they definitely feel it. Like it really hurts. And that's when blue actually starts gaining lots of advantage because like it could keep playing that choke game because of all of the different ways it could play itself.
Mm. Um, so the only other thing I guess to note of the sideboards, since we're on it, is that the Black X Antibody player also had four, or well, had four, not the other ones didn't have four, but let me double check actually. The Little have four? No, it had two.
No, it had to.
Did they mainboard any? No. So it's just two.
No.
So yeah, just like a small little package of Neodevi. But the Zubagon Punch player actually just chose to like put four Neodevi in his sideboard. Um, and you have no other reasons to use that card. You're just slamming that thing for what 7, basically like telling them like I dare you to play a tamer. But um, like that's as much of like a hate card or a silver bullet as much as like sideboards are really coming across right now.
Right, because like the best instance that I could think of on like just a really random off-color Neo Devi is like, okay, turn one, they Digivolve and Raising, then hard play a Memory Fixer to put you at four. And then in response, you could be like, okay, Neo Devi,
Mm-hmm.
for seven, put them at three. Okay, go ahead, play your tamers now.
Yeah, and it's just gonna sit there until they kill it, um, or I guess bounce it with blue. But um, yeah, it's just pretty hard for decks to deal with it if they, or I guess to play around it if they can't deal with it. I guess like it's not that difficult to remove necessarily. Obviously, it's harder than like a Sakuyamon or a Bokamon, but like um, I don't even necessarily think it's super relevant in like off-colored sideboards. Like I don't think blue would ever sideboard it in. I don't necessarily think even like yellow hybrids would want to sideboard it in, even though they're already running purple.
Yeah, it's just one of those like player decisions where like they have to really think hard about like the value of that card and the plays that you're going to be making with that card.
So, um, yeah, going back to the data, like it's really like indicative, I think, that people are playing as if they want to beat yellow, they don't want to lose to yellow, they expect to play yellow. Um, and these are the results we're getting. I really don't think we're in a position where blue hybrids is going to maintain this level of dominance. I mean, so this is showing it. It's a little skewed. I haven't added it together, but like 15 to 20% play rate as far as Limitless is concerned. But maintaining a pretty respectable 60% win rate. Um, though that it is partially inflated because they win 100% of games that they mirror, unlike Yellow who ties. Um, but I think as we like Blue becomes the new big bad, becomes the deck that people expect to see more of and expect to have to like tech to beat, or at least expect and play to beat. Um, we're just gonna see a shift that will probably bring that down a little bit, just like we saw with Lord Nightmon in BT5. Whereas like obviously Lord Nightmon was still the best deck at the end of like BT5. It was still the most popular deck. It it saw a loss in both win percentage and like meta share. Um, I think going from like as high as like 35% of top tables at one point down to I think like 20.
Right. And like this will be up to like us the players to be able to adapt to the different types of environments that we're going to be put in. So like I was playing a match with one of my friends earlier and he teched in um uh not Takuya, the BT5 White Tamer from Cyber Sleuth. I'm blanking on his name.
Takumi Aiba?
Yeah, Takumi. He was teching in Takumi, and I was just like, "Why are you playing this card? That's so out of place." And he's just like, "Oh, it's for the Cherubimon matchups." And I'm just like, "Oh, that
Fair.
makes sense."
That's actually, yeah. Rookies
So like, there's
attack
still
minus one memory, right?
yeah, so like there's still just a lot of like room to explore, not only just because of sideboards, but like just how we want to approach the meta as a whole, depending on what we're trying to beat against and what we're trying to like figure out what we're going to be having a reasonable chance of playing the most of. Because that's just like how certain decks kind of just win is like they either high roll their favorite matchups or low roll their least favorite matchups.
Hmm. Now, I feel like it's at least a little ironic because everyone was talking about it previously, but we haven't mentioned green at all, like at least in passing. Um, Green maintains a fairly strong showing as far as play rate's concerned. Uh, it's behind purple and red, either Jessamon or Ancient Greymon separately, and blue and yellow. So it's, I guess, at this point the actual least popular um, color and deck, at least as far as the hybrids are concerned. Which I guess isn't anything new for green, especially recently. Um, I know green was hyped up quite a bit with its Christmas package, and I remember playing with it initially, and it felt really strong and really powerful. But it falls into that same trap that I think like quote unquote like stack decks fall into, where it really kind of does care about what's underneath it, and blue really messes with that game plan.
Yeah, like I would say blue is like another big gatekeeper for that purpose alone. Like it kind of makes black also really bad because black cares about its inheritables too on various different decks, and just stripping those away is like super brutal. But like that's what makes blue like a big gatekeeper and keeping, I don't want to say keeping other decks in check because like they really don't need to be in check. But it just goes to show that like if you're playing a big stack deck, the second you move out of raising, you need to get 110% value out of that card. Otherwise, it's just going to go away and be completely useless afterward.
Yeah. Um, I guess we're just really seeing that green isn't performing as well as people thought it would, even with its, supposed Christmas package. Um, and really, I think the people that are really sticking with it at the moment are just because of its like cost efficiency, like in the deck, not the like play wise. Like
Well,
it's
play
just a
wise,
really
it also has,
yeah, I
yeah,
guess it's pretty cheap too.
play wise, it has some of the easiest and most scary ways to go up the stages. Like it's actually insane what that deck can possibly do. It's just for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to matter.
Hmm.
But yeah, the deck is like money wise dirt cheap to make because everything is like a rare and below unless you're teching in Susanomons.
Yeah. I mean, I think one in my list still at the moment that I have made. Um, but I'm pretty sure most people don't run Susatamon only because they don't necessarily need it.
No,
Um,
you don't need it at all. It's just there to help refresh the deck against yellow.
I mean, honestly, after seeing that black antibody list, I want to run Chaosmon in it again.
I mean, hey, OTK decks like they're timeless, man. Like
Ooh,
if a deck can OTK fast enough and powerfully enough and consistently enough, then it's still a viable deck even like 10 years from now. It just depends on like how powerful and fast and consistent that OTK actually is. And Chaosmon just in combination with Zubgon Punch, having pseudo blitz is like insane.
yeah. Your mic just tweaked out like a bunch, but I think I got most of that. Um, yeah, like, yeah, any deck that like threatens to like end the game on the following turn is gonna be a problem. The only issue, and my always been my reservation when because I really do like Chaosmon as a card, ever since like I saw it seeing play in BT4, um, is just that I guess it just continues to be true and potentially more true the further into the future we go, where like decks are doing more with less memory, and giving them 5 or 6 memory most likely at a minimum is just too much.
Yeah, it puts you in a really scary zone where like it forces them to respond, but you're also giving them the resources to respond with.
Yeah, because at least in the Zubagon list, that um, Chaosmon is rebooting and is a blocker and is fairly large. Like Doragoromon would still be big too, but would be a level 6, would be a little easier to remove. But in green, you're kind of just passing the turn and chipping at additional security, but you're still probably not like getting rid of all of it either.
Yeah, green doesn't like that's why people adopted the red is because like it makes the damage output a lot higher, but like it also like theoretically people are saying it makes the deck more consistent. I've actually had the reverse where it actually is making my deck less consistent. Just because I don't have the utility to be able to use my various other cards the way that they want to be used, where it's like, oh, I'm locking myself out of evolution paths that I could have had to make my deck more consistent. I'm locking myself out of various other green tools that also could make my deck more consistent in like not so overt ways as just here is a search card. Drawing is still a very relevant thing that you want to be doing, and you could digivolve to draw.
Yeah. I don't know. I just like there's a lot of ways that people could really move to like combat this current meta, and um, I know I've already been begun to see like people. I've mentioned it a couple times, like, oh man, blue's just too good again. Good job. You know, you banned all these cards or restricted all these cards, and it didn't really change anything. Um, but I really don't see us in that position at the moment.
No, it's just up to people to learn to adapt and like just tech correctly against what you think is going to be played the most of. And I think like with all of these blue hybrids showing their early dominance, it's going to start asking people to be able to respond to it. And I think we are good enough players where we will have the ability to be able to respond to it.
And I think for not necessarily for the first time, but like um, a lot of the decks that are prevalent, that are like they're seeing the higher levels of play, they're seeing the higher levels of success, are also decks that punish not necessarily somewhat basic mistakes, but like they aim to really disrupt your standard lines of play. So I guess an easy example is like you have to learn to play against each of these decks like almost in a vacuum. You cannot just play your deck like standardly like as if like your opponent is, X and expect it to work against Y. Um my I guess specific example, there's a couple of them, but would be like a lot of decks run fairly good searchers in the form of on play level 3s that are punished by blue hybrids because you just give them 2 memory from Sora and Joe now.
Right, and like having good removal for those cards is also super important because like there's just a lot of leaving a Pokemon on the field in a tamer based deck is like insanely scary. It's just like, oh, I need to counter that Pokemon or kill it now, otherwise they're just going to start going off and I won't be able to stop them.
Yeah, I think we're just seeing a not necessarily as obvious threat assessment of certain things. Um, especially like, things that the opponent can't even necessarily do anything about. Um, like a lot of these tamer decks are just playing tamers and passing turn, which accrues them, their game plan and they're building towards something, but it's recognizing that you can't let them play entirely their strategy while you also can't entirely play yours.
Right, it's like tug of war, tying back to the memory system. It's like there is a push and pull, and like if you're not properly prepared to play that push and pull, especially off of these low-level Digimon, then you could get blown out very easily. Like it is just the general change on how we're playing Digimon. It's not the first time we've seen it. Like we've had to really start adopting hybrid or not hybrid, raising meta around BT4, BT5 and that fundamentally changed how we wanted to play the game versus 1.0 and 1.5. And now we're just seeing that next shift in how hybrids are being played, just because they're a really strong and powerful presence that doesn't seem to be going away.
Yeah, I guess what we're really just redefining what it means to be efficient because, you know, if like your opponent has a memory tamer on the board, um like a solid turn used to be get to 0, like, and if you didn't have the ability to like evo into a level 5 for 3 or get as close to that 3 as possible, like you could just hard play a searcher for 3. um but against a lot of decks now, or at least against the meta decks, that's less efficient, and you're kind of either giving them a target for something or you're giving them a source to potentially gain some value from. And even like basic chipping, I guess is like the example of like playing somewhat inefficiently against yellow hybrid because yellow hybrid gains value in a lot of ways from you trying to chip them. Um, you give them tamers and you give them means with which to activate their dual tamer.
Right, and it's really just understanding like how decks want to be functioning that like really is starting to show like the good players from the okay players. Just because like going back to yellow hybrids, it's like they don't want to attack because they want TK and Kari to give them a lot of memory, and they can only do that when their security is lower than yours. So they fundamentally can't attack until you get them to that state. So like that's part of like meta and deck comprehension is like understanding what they're trying to do and play around that.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna say it's easy either. Like I definitely won't will be the first one to say like um with like how quickly the game has changed its level of like not even necessarily like complexity, but like awareness of value. Like like I said, it like 2 sets ago, it would be completely fine to um just play a vanilla one cost level 4 to Evo at least um as like your standard staple of your deck, right? That was what the meta defined as efficiency, whereas now the meta defines efficiency as um what ways can you effectively get to your pieces faster through means of like searching or recursion or draw power, or what means can you stave off aggression and accrue value from it in the form of blue/yellow, mostly.
Right, because like part of their dominance is the fact that they just have access to lots of different tools that allows them to make very powerful and very efficient plays. And that's why purple is also seeing a bit of a rise, is because its tools are just getting better.
Mm. Yeah, like any deck that can play with its graveyard the way that purple does, pretty much I guess exclusively at this point. It's the only deck that really cares about what's in there and like curates what's in there. Um, the more variety of pieces it has, and the um, more cards that play with those pieces, the more consistent and the more complex these decks are going to get. I guess that's a really good point to make. Is that like as the meta adds more purple, the meta also gets more competitive, like inherently as like I guess a skill floor point of view. Like if your best deck in the meta is loop, which it potentially could be, I don't feel like there's enough competitive players necessarily that have dedicated their time to loop to show that or not, like through results. But the idea that if the best deck is loop and more people are trying loop, like I think it's just a much harder competitive game to get into.
Right, and certain decks are a lot simpler and easier to play, and like that's fine. There's nothing wrong against it. You just have to be a good enough player to be able to adapt the what the deck is trying to do to counter or at least to be able to play against various other decks and understand what they're trying to do. So there's like just more understanding that's required on the player to be able to have a better grasp on what the game is.
And those of us that have been around here from the beginning, like I guess we kind of understand that, or we're getting there. Like at least I felt it. Like the at least from my locals, those of us that still play consistently, I don't go as often as I would like to, but um, I'm still going. Which says a lot for a lot of other people who I haven't seen since like BT4 or earlier. When like this large influx of players hit the game when it came out. But like it's not hard, even from people who play very casually. Like they understand, even if they don't understand like exactly what to do with it, that like there's a lot more decisions to be made in deck building, in plays on your turn, in like what exactly which tamer you're evoing from, which tamer are you playing. You have to think 2, 3, 4 moves ahead sometimes.
Yeah, and like that's kind of why I also like doing YouTube is because I also feel like it makes me a better player because I'm dipping my toes in a little bit of everything, getting a broad spectrum of like what everything is trying to do. Just past like some simple design things where the game is like trying to actually tell me how to play the game. But designer intent and actual like player outcome are usually two completely different things. But like I'm not necessarily surprised when I see something do well because I'm like, oh, I get like I know why it's doing well.
Yeah, that's a that is fun too. Like, um, I I looked at NeoDevi like when I knew that we were approaching, hybrid meta, and I didn't even necessarily think there'd be as many hybrid decks as there are, especially because I didn't even really consider purple hybrid a deck initially. I thought everyone was just gonna play loop. Um, like Neo Devi is just such a good card. I was really trying to make like a whole like Don Devimon work. Um, but like the idea of just like to look at a card and be like, huh, this is pretty good, and then like walk away from it and come back and like it's in, two sideboards out of eight at DigiFest. That's whole like selling point is that there are sideboards.
Right. And I think that's just like a factor of the game where it's just like you could look at a card and it might not have immediate impact right now, but it could have potential impact later when it gets support or when the meta changes to accommodate it. And I think like that's just the beauty of card games in general is just like something that might not be good now could be good later due to various other factors. And then the market starts going crazy because everyone's like taken by surprise and yada yada yada. It's just a fun thing to think about and look around it with.
Yeah. Um, I guess I really don't have anything else. Do you have anything else you want to say before we close it out?
No, I think we had some really good topics and discussion points on just general changes that we're seeing and like the trend and the bigger picture.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but like the just the idea that wow, blue is showing very strong results early. I don't think it'll necessarily maintain that. I mean, I could be wrong, obviously. Like, who knows? Maybe, we come back next week and Blues won 8 out of 8 top eights and, managed to kick the one black player in an alley or something and find that, like, yellow player that didn't tie. But, um, I do think the meta will adapt to it. I do think the card game will move like away from the decks that do less and into the decks that do more. And I guess the better part is that blue isn't an easy or blue hybrid is not an easy deck to play. At least compared to Gabu Bond, like where Hoop
No,
is
it's a lot harder.
like I haven't played blue hybrids as much, basically minimally and almost exclusively like against myself in practice games. But as far as like playing against blue hybrid, like I feel like they make more mistakes than a Gabu Bond could physically make, only just because that like you still do have to kind of think ahead. What are you stripping sources from? What are you adding back to hand? What are you stun locking and why? There are decisions to be made.
For sure. Like it's definitely one of the more complicated blue decks, and that's kind of why I think it's like really fun at the same time. Just because like you really do have to think a little bit more critically, and that doesn't necessarily make it an easy deck. But
Hmm.
like as far as like the meta is concerned, like it is gonna go in one of two ways. It's either gonna be a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's just like everyone thinks it's the best, so everyone's gonna play it, and then therefore it's the only thing that shows up, and therefore it is the best, or we learn to adapt and we figure out how to be able to beat it and tackle it, and you'll have some success once you understand that secret.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a good point too. Is that like to to have an aggregate of success, you also need to have an aggregate of supply. So, even if, Loop is the best deck potentially, as we've potentially alluded to, like, if 3 people bring it, it doesn't matter if it's the best deck. The likelihood of it being 3 out of the top 8 is almost non-existent.
Right.
You just kind of need
But
that, like, base level of play rate to support its, because, like, even, like I said, 60% win rate is pretty high, again, assuming that they win 100% of the mirror, but, like, 60% is still like just slightly better than a coin toss.
Right. It's not like game breaking or game shatteringly high. Like it is a little bit cause for concern. But like I said, it's self-fulfilling prophecy half the time where it's just like everyone plays it because they think it's the best. And that's where we started off with yellow and how we got into this whole thing, into this whole predicament to begin with.
Yeah. It'll really just be on the players to decide whether they want blue hybrid to be the best deck, and if so, they play it, and if they don't, then they try and beat it instead of joining them.
Right. And that's just kind of the nature of how metas generally work, which makes the game really fun and exciting.
Okay. With that, I think we're gonna close it out. So, um, I guess we'll talk to you next week. See ya.
Later.